Orrin. It was so unexpected that I just lay there staring. And then I began to bring my thoughts together, and when I considered it, I couldn't believe it. Sure, Orrin was married to Pritts' daughter, but Orrin had always seemed the sort of man who couldn't be influenced against his principles. We've been closer, even more than most brothers. So where did that leave me? Our lives had been built tightly around our blood ties for Lord knows how many years. Only I knew that even if it was Orrin, I was going to arrest him. Brother or not, blood tie or not. It was my job and I would do it. And then I had another thought. Sure, I could see that I was a fool. There had to be another reason. My faith in Orrin went far beyond any suspicion his presence here seemed to mean. So I got up. His attention was on that camp as mine had been, and I had taken 3 steps before he saw me. He turned his head, and we looked into each other's eyes, and then I walked on toward him. Before I could speak, he lifted a hand. "Wait," he whispered. And in the stillness that followed, I heard what those men down below must have heard some time before. The sound of a buckboard coming. We stood there with the sky blushing rose and red and the gold cresting the far-off ridges and the shadows still lying black in the hollows. We stood together there, as we had stood together before, against the Higginses, against the dark demons of the drought and stones that plagued our hillside farm in Tennessee, against the Utes, and against Reed Carney. We stood together, and in that moment, I suddenly knew why he was there, and knew before the buckboard came into sight just who I would see. The buckboard came into the trail below and drew up, and the driver was Laura. Paisano and Dwyer went out to meet her, and we watched money pass between them and watched them unload supplies from the back of the buckboard. And somehow, I never figured on a woman, least of all Laura. In the West, in those years, we respected our women, and it was not in me to arrest one, although I surely had no doubts that a woman could be mighty evil and wrong. Least of all could I arrest Laura. It was a duty I had, but it was her father I wanted, and the truth was plain to see. A man who would send his daughter on such a job. He was lower than I figured. Of course, there was mighty few who'd believe it or even suspect such a frail, blonde, and ladylike girl of meeting and delivering money to murderers. Orrin shifted his feet slightly, and I sighed. I never saw him look the way he did. His face looking sick and empty, like somebody had hit him in the midsection with a stiff punch. "I had to see it," he said to me. "I had to see it myself to believe it. Last night, I suspected something like this, but I had to be here to see." "You knew where the camp was?" "Jonathan gave her most careful directions last night." "I should arrest her," I said. "As you think best." "It isn't her I want," I said, "and she'd be no good to me. She'd never talk." Orrin was quiet, and then he said, "I think I'll move out to the ranch, Tyrel. I'll move out today." "Ma would like that. She getting feeble, Orrin." We went back into the brushmite, and Orrin rolled a smoke and lit up. "Tyrel," he said after a minute, "what's he paying them for?" "Was it for Taurus?" "Not for Taurus," I said. Feddison already paid them. For you? Maybe. I doubt it. Suddenly, I wanted to get away from there. Those two, I could find them when I wanted them, for they were known men, and the man I had wanted had been cagey enough not to appear. Orrin, I said, I've got to head Laura off. I'm not going to arrest her. I just wanted to know she's been seen, and I know what's going on. I want them to know, and I want them to worry about it. Is that why you're holding Wilson apart? Yeah. We went back to our horses, and then we cut along the hill through the bright beauty of the morning to join the trail a mile or so beyond where Laura would be. When she came up, for a minute I thought she would try to drive right over us, but she drew up. She was pale, but the planes of her face had drawn down in hard lines, and I never saw such hatred in a woman's eyes. Now you're spying on me. There was nothing soft and delicate about her voice then. It was strident, angry. Not on you, I said. On Paisano and Dwyer. She flinched as if I'd struck her, started to speak, and then pressed her lips together. They were in the group that killed Juan Torres, I said, along with Wilson. If you believe that, why don't you arrest them? Are you afraid? Just waiting. Sometimes if a man lets a small fish be his bait, he can catch a bigger fish. Like you, bringing supplies and money to them. That makes you an accessory. You can be tried for aiding and abetting. For the first time, she was really scared. She was a girl who made much of position, a mighty snooty sort, if you ask me, and being arrested would just about kill her. You wouldn't dare. She said it, but she didn't believe it. She believed I would, and it scared the devil out of her. Your father has been buying murder too long, and there is no place here for such men. Now you know. Her face was pinched and white, and there was nothing pretty about her then. Let me pass, she demanded bitterly. We drew aside, and she looked at Orrin. You were nothing when we met, and you'll be nothing again. Orrin removed his hat. Under the circumstances, he said gently, you'll pardon me if I remove my belongings? She slashed the horses with the whip and went off. Orrin's face was white as we cut over across the hills. I'd like to be out of the house, he said, before she gets back. The town was quiet when I rode in. Feddison came to the bars of his cell and stared at me when I entered. He knew I'd been away and it worried him. He didn't know what I was doing. Paisano and Dwyer are just outside the town, I said, and no two men are going to manage a jail delivery. But Pritts was paying them. What for? His eyes searched my face, and suddenly he turned and looked at the barred window. Beyond the window, 300 yards away, was the wooded hillside, and to the right, not over 60 yards, the roof of the store. He turned back swiftly. Ty, he said, you got to get me out of here. Feddison was no fool, and he knew there was no trust in Jonathan Pritts. Feddison would die before he would talk, but Pritts did not for a minute believe that. Consequently, he intended that Feddison should die before he could talk. Vet, I said, it's up to you not to get in front of that window. Or, I paused and let the word hang for a minute, you can talk and tell me the whole story. He turned sharply away and walked back to his cot and lay down. I knew that window would worry him. Wilson would worry him. And he would worry about how much I knew. You might as well tell me and save your bacon, I said. Wilson hasn't had a drink in 3 days, and he'll tell all he knows any day now. After that, we won't care about you. Right then, I went to Saren St. Vrain. He was the most influential man in Mora. And I had Vincent Romero come in, and we had a talk. Ollie Shattuck was there, and Bill Sexton, and Orrin. I want 10 deputies, I said. I want Serain to pick 5 of them, and Romero to pick the other 5. I want solid, reliable men. I don't care whether they are good men with guns or not. I want substantial citizens. They picked them, and we talked the whole thing over. I laid all my cards on the table and told them just the situation, and I didn't beat around the bush. Wilson was talking all right. He had a hand in the killing of Torres, and the others he named, the other men involved, and I told them that Paisano and Dwyer were out in the hills, and I was going to go after them myself. I made good on my word to Tina Fernandez, and I got a promise from Serain himself to go after her with a couple of his riders to back him up. He was a man respected and liked and feared. On Jonathan Pritts, I didn't pull any punches. Telling them of our meeting with him in Abilene, of our talk with him in Santa Fe, of the men waiting at Pawnee Rock and what he had done. St. Vrain was an old friend to the Alvarado family. He knew much of what I said. What is it? Ty, what do you want to do? I believe Feddersen is ready to talk, I said. We'll have Wilson, we'll have Tina, and Cap's evidence as well as my own, for we trailed the killers to Tres Ritos. What about Mrs. Sackett? St. Vrain asked. Right there, I hesitated. She's a woman, and I'd like to keep her out of it. They all agreed to this. And when the meeting broke up, I was to have a final talk with Feddersen. This was to be an end of it. There was no anger in me anymore. Juan Torres was gone, and another death could not bring him back. Jonathan Pritts would suffer enough to see all his schemes come to nothing, and they would now. I knew that Vincent Romero was the most respected man in the Spanish-speaking group, and St. Vrain among the Anglos. Once they had said what they had to say, Jonathan Pritts would no longer have influence locally nor in Santa Fe. Orrin and me, we walked back to the jail together, and it was good to walk beside him, brothers, in feeling as well as in blood. It's tough, I said to him. I know how you felt about Laura, but Orrin, you were in love with what you thought she was. A man often creates an image of a girl in his mind, but when it comes right down to it, that's the only place the girl exists. Maybe, Orrin said gloomily. I was never meant to be married. We stopped in front of the sheriff's office, and Cap came out to join us. Tom's in town, he said, and he's drunk and spoiling for a fight. We'll go talk to him, Orrin said. Cap caught Orrin's arm. Not you, Orrin. You'd set him off. If you see him now, there'll be a shooting sure. A shooting? Orrin smiled disbelievingly. Cap, you're clean off the trail. Why, Tom's one of my best friends. Look, Cap replied shortly, you're no tenderfoot. How much common sense or reason is there behind 2/3 of the killings out here? You bump into a man, you spill his drink, you say the wrong thing. It doesn't have to make sense. There's no danger from Tom, Orrin insisted quietly. I'd stake my life on it. That's just what you'd be doing, Cap replied. The man's not the Tom Sunday that drove cows with us. He's turned into a mighty mean man, and he's been riding herd on a grudge against you. He's been living alone down there, and he's been hitting the bottle. Cap's right, I told him. Tom's carrying a chip on his shoulder. All right, I want no trouble with him or anyone. You got an election coming up, Cap added. You get in a gun battle, and a lot of folks will turn their backs on you. Reluctantly, Orrin mounted up and rode out to the ranch. And for the first time in my life, I was glad to see him go. Things had been building toward trouble for months now, and Tom Sunday was only a small part of it. But the last thing I wanted to see was a gun battle between Tom and Orrin. At all costs, that fight must be prevented for both their sakes and for Orrin's future. Ollie came by the office after Orrin had left. "Pritts is down to Santa Fe," he said, "and he's getting himself nowhere. Vincent Romero has been down there, and so has St. Vrain, and it looks like they put the kibosh on him. Tina was in town and staying with Drew, and we had our deposition from Wilson. I expect he was ready to get shut of the whole shebang. For at heart, Wilson was not a bad man, only he was where bad company and bad liquor had taken him. He talked about things clear back to Pawnee Rock, and we took that deposition in front of 7 witnesses, 3 of them from the Mexicans and 4 Anglos. When the trial came up, I didn't want it said we'd beaten it out of him. But once he started talking, he left nothing untold. On Wednesday night, I went to see Feddersen, for I'd been staying away and giving him time to think. He looked gaunt and scared. He was a man with plenty of sand, but nobody likes to be set up as number 1 target in a shooting gallery. "Fet," I said, "I can't promise you anything but a chance in court, but the more you cooperate, the better. If you want out of the cell, you better talk." "You're a hard man, Tyrel," he said gloomily. "You stay with a thing." "Fet," I said, "men like you and me have had our day. Folks want to settle affairs in court now, and not with guns. Women and children coming west want to walk a street without stray bullets flying around. A man has to make peace with the times. If I talk, I'll hang myself." "Maybe not. Folks are more anxious to have an end to all this trouble than to punish anybody." He still hesitated, so I left him there and went out to the cool night. Orrin was out at the ranch and better off there, and Cap Roundtree was someplace up the street. Bill Shea came out of the jailhouse. "Take a walk if you're of a mind to, Tyrel," he suggested. "There's 3 of us here." Saddling the Montana horse, I rode over to see Drew. It was a desert mountain night, with the sky so clear and the stars so close, it looked like you could knock them down with a stick. Drew had sold the big house that lay closer to Santa Fe and was spending most of her time in this smaller but more comfortable house near Mora. She came to the door to meet me, and we walked back inside, and I told her about the meeting with Romero and St. Vrain and the situation with Feddersen. "Move him, Ty. You must move him out of there before he is killed. It is not right to keep him in there like that. I want him to talk." She was right, of course, and I'd been thinking of it. "All right," I said, "first thing in the morning." Sometimes the most important things in a man's life are the ones he talks about the least. It was that way with Drew and me. No day passed that I did not think of her much of the time. She was always with me, and even when we were together, we didn't talk a lot because so much of the time there was no need for words. It was something that existed between us and that we both understood. The happiest hours of my life were those when I was riding with Drew or sitting across the table from her. And I always remember her face by candlelight. It seemed I was always seeing it that way, with soft sounds of the rustle of gowns and the tinkle of silver and glass, and Drew's voice, never raised and always exciting. Within the quick adobe walls of the old Spanish house, there was quiet, a shadowed peace that I had associated with such houses all my years. One stepped through the door into another world and left outside the trouble, the confusion, and the storm of the day. "When this is over, Drew," I said, "we'll wait no longer, and it will soon be over." "We do not need to wait." She turned from the window where we stood and looked up at me. I'm ready now. This must be over first, Drew. It's the thing I have to do, and when it's finished, I should take off my badge and leave the public offices to Orrin. Suddenly, there was an uneasiness upon me, and I said to her, I must go. She walked to the door with me. Vaya con Dios, she said, and she waited there until I was gone. And that night, there was trouble in town, but it was not the trouble I expected.